The radio has been dead for 7 years, Caleb Mercer whispers. So why did it just say my name? Wind hammers the abandoned lighthouse hard enough to make the iron stairs tremble beneath his boots. Outside, the Atlantic is a sheet of black glass shattered by white waves, each one rising out of the darkness and breaking against the rocks nearly 80 feet below. Rain crawls sideways across the narrow windows. The air inside smells of salt, wet stone, old oil, and something faintly metallic left behind by machinery that has not moved in years. Caleb stands in the doorway of the lantern room with one hand wrapped around his flashlight and the other pressed against the cold frame, listening. At first, there is only the storm. Then he hears it again. Not a voice this time. A breath. Thin, uneven, alive. His flashlight moves across the room, passing over rusted gears, coils of frayed wire, and a radio console buried beneath dust. The beam stops near the far wall. A German shepherd lies curled beneath the desk. The dog is so still that Caleb almost mistakes him for a discarded coat. Then one amber eye opens. The animal is large, or once was. Now his sable fur hangs loosely over a narrow frame, and the dark ridge along his back rises above ribs that should not be visible. His muzzle has gone silver with age. One ear stands upright while the other bends slightly at the tip. There is no growl, no bark, only a stare too steady for a stray and too tired for fear. Caleb lowers the flashlight. Easy boy. The dog does not move. His front paw rests on a metal switch beside the radio. Caleb takes one careful step forward. The shepherd's gaze follows him, sharp despite the exhaustion in it. A faded leather collar circles the dog's neck, cracked by salt and time. Something metal hangs beneath his throat, but the angle hides the writing. Caleb kneels 6 feet away and removes a small bottle of water from his field pack. He pours some into the cap and sets it on the floor. I didn't come to take anything from you. The shepherd looks at the water, then back at Caleb. It is not refusal. It feels more like duty, as if the dog believes that looking away, even for a second, might allow something important to disappear. Caleb knows that look. He has seen it on Marines standing the last watch before dawn, when fatigue turns every shadow into a question, but training keeps the body upright. He slides the cap closer. The dog sniffs once, slowly, yet still does not drink. Somewhere above them, the great glass lens groans in its frame. Lightning flashes over the ocean, filling the room with pale blue light. For that instant, Caleb sees the radio clearly. A military field receiver has been built into the Lighthouse console, its casing older than anything still used by the Coast Guard. The frequency dial is fixed at 2,182 kilohertz, the old maritime distress channel. A thin red indicator glows beneath the dust. Caleb's breath catches. There should be no power here. The lighthouse was decommissioned 7 years ago. The cables running down the tower were cut long before he arrived. Yet the light remains. Faint. Patient. Waiting. The shepherd shifts his paw. The speaker crackles. Caleb freezes. Static washes through the room like dry leaves dragged across concrete. Then, beneath the storm, a man's voice rises from the noise. Weak. Broken into pieces. Caleb. Every muscle in Caleb's body locks. The voice is older in memory than it is in sound, but he knows it. He knows the rough edge on the first syllable. He knows the pause afterward, the way Daniel always leaves space as if expecting his older brother to answer. Caleb leans toward the radio. Daniel. The speaker hisses. The shepherd lifts his head. His ears angle toward the voice, and for the first time, something changes in his eyes. Not surprise. Recognition. Caleb reaches for the console, but the dog releases a low warning sound. It is not aggressive. It is almost pleading. Caleb stops with his hand inches from the switch. You know that voice. The shepherd pushes himself upright. His legs shake beneath him, yet he places his body between Caleb and the radio. Rain drums against the glass. The red indicator flickers once. Then the message continues. Do not let him leave the light. The words fade into static. The dog closes his eyes as though the sentence carries a weight he has held for too long. Caleb stares at the console, then at the animal guarding it. 7 years ago, his younger brother disappeared during a coastal training mission. No body was recovered. No final call was found. His K9 partner was listed among the lost. Caleb has spent every year since learning how to live without answers, because answers do not always come, and hope can become another room a man traps himself inside. But now that room is real. It stands on a storm-beaten point in Maine, 80 feet above a furious sea, and inside it waits a starving German shepherd who should not be alive beside a radio that should not work. Caleb slowly removes his glove and holds out his empty hand. The dog studies it. 1 second passes, then another. At last, the shepherd steps forward and presses his cold nose against Caleb's palm. The metal tag beneath his collar swings into the flashlight beam. Caleb wipes away the salt with his thumb. The engraving appears one letter at a time. K9 Atlas. Beneath it is a second line. CPL, D. Mercer. Caleb's hand begins to tremble. Atlas looks up at him, not like a dog meeting a stranger, but like a soldier finally recognizing the man he was ordered to find. Behind them, the dead radio clicks once more. 6 hours earlier, Caleb Mercer had been alone inside the coastal communications station at Rockland Harbor, listening to a storm gather strength beyond the dark windows. The building was small, square, and practical, set 50 yards from the water behind a chain-link fence silvered by salt. Fluorescent lights hummed above rows of monitors. A dented coffee maker clicked beside a stack of weather reports. Outside, the wind pushed fishing boats against their lines, making the dock bells ring in slow, uneven notes. Caleb sat before the emergency receiver with his jacket folded over the back of the chair and both sleeves rolled to his elbows. At 38, he still carried the shape of a United States Marine. Broad shoulders, straight back. Movements kept precise even when no one was watching. His dark blonde hair was cut close, and a thin scar crossed the lower edge of his chin. Most people assumed the scar came from combat. Caleb never corrected them. Some wounds were easier to explain when people guessed wrong. He had spent the evening checking civilian distress frequencies while the Coast Guard prepared for the approaching weather. It was temporary duty, quiet work meant for a man who had once been trusted with field communications and now preferred machines because machines did not ask whether he had healed. At 7 minutes past 8, a burst of static moved across the receiver. Caleb reached for the gain control. The sound vanished. He waited. 20 seconds later, it returned. 3 short pulses. A pause. 2 longer ones. Then silence. Caleb wrote the time in the logbook and checked the frequency. The channel had not been used in years, not officially. It belonged to an older maritime distress system, one replaced before the station received its newest equipment. He adjusted the dial by half a point. The speaker answered with wind-like noise. Then a mechanical tone pushed through, thin and distant. Caleb leaned closer. A pattern repeated twice. Mike. 2. 7. His hand stopped above the page. The room seemed to shrink around him. Mike 27 had been Daniel's call sign during the final year of his service. Corporal Daniel Mercer. Younger brother. K9 handler. The one person who could make Caleb laugh during a 12-hour watch and irritate him within the same breath. Daniel had disappeared 7 years earlier during a coastal readiness exercise north of Portland. The official report described sudden fog, equipment failure, and a disabled support boat driven beyond the search grid. No remains were recovered. No complete transmission survived. The K9 assigned to him, a German shepherd named Atlas, was listed as missing and presumed lost. Caleb had read those lines until the words no longer looked like language. He had attended a memorial where the folded flag felt too light in his hands. He had listened while officers spoke about service, sacrifice, and closure. Closure was a word used by people who still knew where to place their grief. Caleb had never found a place for his. He returned to the receiver and replayed the station buffer. The signal came through again. Mike 27. Then, a location marker hidden beneath the interference. Sentinel Point. Caleb stared toward the rain-streaked window. The lighthouse at Sentinel Point had been dark since the same winter Daniel disappeared. Its automated beacon had failed after a foundation inspection, and the property was sealed while ownership passed between state and federal agencies. No keeper lived there. No active transmitter remained. Caleb called the Coast Guard operations desk and reported the signal without mentioning Daniel. The officer on duty blamed atmospheric skip, a rare condition capable of carrying distant radio traffic far beyond its normal range. Caleb wanted to accept that explanation. It was reasonable. Safe. The kind of answer that allowed a man to remain seated. Then the receiver crackled for a third time. Beneath the static came a faint sound that was not mechanical. A dog barked once. Caleb stood so quickly that the chair rolled backward into the wall. The bark was low, controlled, followed by silence. Not panic, not noise, an alert. Daniel had trained Atlas to give exactly one bark when visual contact was impossible, but confirmation was required. Caleb remembered teasing him about it during a visit to the base. One bark for yes, Daniel had said, rubbing the shepherd behind the ears. Two if he thinks you are asking a stupid question. Caleb had laughed then. He did not laugh now. He pulled on his jacket, signed out a four-wheel drive utility vehicle, and loaded a flashlight, emergency water, a first aid kit, and 2 sealed packages of K9 food from the station supply room. The drive north took less than an hour, though the road felt longer beneath the worsening rain. Pine trees bent along the shoulder. Fog gathered in the low fields. Each mile carried Caleb farther from reason and closer to the hope he had spent 7 years refusing to name. When Sentinel Point finally appeared, it stood beyond the cliffs like a pale finger raised against the storm. No beacon turned above it. No window showed light. Yet Caleb's receiver, resting on the passenger seat, gave one final pulse. Mike 27. He parked beside the rusted gate and continued on foot, fighting through wind that smelled of cold stone and deep water. At the lighthouse door, he found fresh scratches in the weathered paint, for narrow lines at the height of a large dog's paws. Above them, someone had carved a single word into the wood. Listen. Caleb placed his hand against the door. From somewhere high inside the tower came one measured bark. The bark does not come again. Caleb presses his shoulder against the swollen door, and the old wood gives with a long groan. Cold air spills out of the tower, carrying the smell of salt, damp rope, and something faintly animal. His flashlight cuts through the darkness. The entry room is empty except for a broken chair, a rusted coat hook, and a line of muddy paw prints crossing the stone floor. They are recent. Rainwater still shines inside them. Caleb closes the door against the wind and follows the tracks toward the spiral staircase. Atlas, he calls softly. The name feels strange in his mouth after 7 years. Too familiar to belong in this place. Too alive. Nothing answers. He begins to climb. The iron steps curl upward through the narrow tower, each one ringing beneath his boots. The walls sweat with moisture. Wind hums through cracks in the masonry, low and steady, almost like a distant voice trying to form words. Halfway up, Caleb finds the first sign that someone has been living there. An empty water bowl sits beside the wall. A folded wool blanket lies nearby, worn thin at the center. Above it hangs a photograph protected inside a cracked plastic sleeve. Caleb lifts it carefully. The picture shows Daniel standing beside a younger Atlas on a training field under a bright North Carolina sky. Daniel is smiling with one hand resting on the dog's shoulders. Atlas is looking at him instead of the camera. Caleb remembers taking that picture during a family visit to Camp Lejeune. He remembers Daniel complaining about the heat. He remembers Atlas stealing a hamburger from a paper plate and then sitting perfectly still, as if discipline might erase the evidence. The memory arrives warm and sharp. Caleb lowers the photograph before it can become too much. Beside the blanket, he sees several empty cans of dog food and a handwritten note taped to the wall. The ink has faded, but the message remains clear. He will not leave the radio. Please do not force him. Caleb reads it twice. At the bottom is a name. Walter Hayes, the last lighthouse keeper. The man listed in public records as having moved inland nearly a year ago. Caleb looks up the staircase. Who has been feeding you since Walter left? He asks. A soft scrape comes from above. Then silence. He continues climbing. Near the top, the paw prints become uneven. One mark drags slightly behind the others. Caleb feels something tighten in his chest. The dog is not only hungry. He is weak. The final stair opens into a small service room beneath the lantern chamber. A torn food sack rests in one corner. Its paper lining has been licked clean. A metal bucket catches rain from the ceiling, each drop landing with a hollow note. On the floor lies a frayed piece of military webbing. Caleb recognizes the stitching. It once belonged to a working harness. He kneels and picks it up. A single word is printed beneath years of dust and salt. Atlas. Above him, a floorboard creaks. Caleb rises slowly. He removes one sealed package of K9 food from his pack, opens it, and places a small portion in his palm. I know you are up there, he says. I know who you are. The wind presses against the tower. The entire structure seems to inhale. Caleb climbs the final steps into the lantern room. His flashlight moves across the great glass lens, the silent gears, and the radio console beneath the windows. Then the beam finds the German Shepherd. Atlas is lying beside the radio with his body curved around it, as though protecting the machine from the cold. His coat is dark sable, dull from neglect, and silver touches his muzzle. His ribs show beneath his fur. Yet his amber eyes are clear, alert, watching. Caleb does not approach immediately. He lowers himself to one knee and sets the food on the floor between them. Atlas looks at it, but does not move. His front paw remains pressed against a switch on the radio. "You waited here," Caleb whispers. "All this time." Atlas lifts his head at the sound of Caleb's voice. His nose moves once, testing the air. Then his gaze drops to the dog tags hanging beneath Caleb's jacket. Caleb pulls them free. The metal catches the flashlight. Atlas stares at them, and something quiet passes across his face. Recognition without certainty. Hope held behind training. He rises with effort. His legs tremble, but he takes one step forward. Then another. Caleb remains still. Atlas reaches him and touches his nose to the tags. For one long second, neither of them moves. Then the dog looks past Caleb toward the staircase, toward the photograph below, as if searching for the man whose scent should have followed. Caleb understands the question. "Daniel is not with me," he says. Atlas closes his eyes. His body sways. Caleb catches him gently before he falls, one arm beneath his chest, the other supporting his narrow frame. The dog is lighter than he should be, far too light. Yet even in Caleb's arms, Atlas stretches one paw toward the radio. The message is clear. "Not yet. Do not take me away." Caleb looks at the dead console, the severed cables, and the faint red glow beneath the dust. "All right," he murmurs. "I will listen." Atlas settles against him. Somewhere inside the radio, a relay clicks. The relay clicks again, and the faint red light beneath the radio dial grows steady. Caleb remains on the floor with Atlas resting against him, one hand spread across the dog's narrow chest. Beneath his palm, the heartbeat is weak but stubborn. The storm presses against the lantern room, rattling every pane of glass and sending long moans through the iron frame. Caleb looks at his watch. 2:16 in the morning. He has been inside the lighthouse for nearly 4 hours. During that time, Atlas has taken only a few careful drinks of water and several small bites of softened food, never enough to satisfy his hunger, only enough to keep standing. Each time Caleb tries to move him farther from the radio, the shepherd braces his paws against the floor and turns back toward the console. There is no confusion in the behavior. It is a watch, a duty, something repeated so many nights that the body remembers even when strength is almost gone. Caleb studies the machine. The old receiver has no visible power source. Its main cable ends in a clean cut beside the wall, and the emergency battery compartment is empty. Still, the red light remains. The frequency needle trembles at the same maritime channel that carried the signal to Rockland Harbor. Atlas opens his eyes. His ears lift. Caleb feels the change before he hears anything. The dog's breathing slows. His muscles tighten beneath the loose fur. He pulls away from Caleb and forces himself upright. "Easy," Caleb says. Atlas ignores him. He steps toward the radio with the solemn care of an old Marine approaching formation. One paw, then another. His rear legs shake, but he does not stop. Caleb rises beside him, ready to catch him. The watch changes to 2:17. Atlas sits. His back straightens despite the weakness in his frame. He faces the dark ocean beyond the glass, then turns his head toward the radio. With his right paw, he touches the metal switch once. The speaker answers with a low burst of static. Atlas waits. 3 seconds pass. He touches it again. Static. Another pause. A third touch. Caleb stares at the dog. This is not random. Atlas lowers his paw and scratches the floor 3 short times. Then 3 slow, drawn-out strokes. Then 3 short ones again. Caleb feels the pattern before his mind names it. Distress. A call for help. Atlas looks at him. "You have been sending it," Caleb whispers. The dog turns back to the console. The speaker crackles, and a sound rises beneath the interference. Wind. Water. Then the faint mechanical pulse of an alarm. Caleb reaches for the tuning dial, moving it by the smallest degree. The noise sharpens. A man's voice breaks through. It is buried under years of static, but the words are there. "One survivor, Caleb leans closer. Repeat that. Only the storm answers. Atlas gives a soft whine. The voice returns, thinner now. One survivor, at the light, then it disappears. Caleb closes his eyes. One survivor. The meaning seems clear. Daniel had known Atlas reached the lighthouse. The message must have been a final attempt to direct rescuers toward the dog. Caleb looks at the shepherd and feels grief shift inside him. Not leaving, but taking on a shape he can finally hold. He was trying to save you, he says. Atlas does not react to the words. Instead, he stands and moves away from the radio. For the first time since Caleb found him, the dog willingly leaves the console. He crosses the lantern room toward the northern wall, where old maps hang curled and brown beneath broken glass. His nails scrape over the wooden floor. He stops near the base of the wall and sniffs along a narrow seam between two boards. Then he begins to dig. The motion is weak at first, one paw dragging across the wood. Then another. Caleb kneels beside him. What is it? Atlas scratches faster. The boards are newer than the rest of the floor, their color slightly lighter beneath the dust. Caleb runs his fingers along the edge and finds the head of a recessed brass screw. Someone sealed this section deliberately. Atlas presses his nose against the seam and releases a quiet sound from deep in his throat. Not fear. Urgency. Caleb takes a multi-tool from his pocket and begins loosening the first screw. The wood groans as the storm shakes the tower. Behind him, the radio whispers with empty static. He removes the second screw, then the third. Atlas sits close enough that his shoulder touches Caleb's arm. Beneath the final corner of the board, something pale is trapped between the wood and the stone. Caleb pulls it free. A strip of paper. The edge is brittle, and the handwriting has faded, but he recognizes the careful block letters from the note beside the blanket. Walter Hayes. Caleb lifts the floor panel. A small leather journal rests in the darkness below, wrapped in waxed cloth. Atlas lowers his head toward it, then looks back at the radio as though listening for permission. Caleb opens the cover. The first page contains a date from 7 years earlier and one sentence written in trembling ink. The dog came out of the sea alone, but every night at 2:17, he waits for someone else to answer. Caleb turns the next page while Atlas settles beside him, the dog's shoulder pressed against his knee as though the journal belongs to both of them. Walter Hayes writes in the steady hand of a man accustomed to recording weather, tide, and light. 7 years. Earlier, just before dawn, he found Atlas on the rocks below the eastern bluff. The shepherd was exhausted, soaked in freezing seawater, and wearing part of a military harness. Walter expected the dog to flee when approached. Instead, Atlas climbed the lighthouse steps, entered the lantern room, and sat beside the radio. At 2:17 that night, he placed one paw on the switch and waited. Walter heard nothing. The next night, Atlas repeated the same ritual. Then the next. Walter began leaving the receiver tuned to the old distress channel, more out of kindness than belief. Weeks passed. Seasons changed. Atlas learned every stare, every draft, every shift in the sea. He would patrol the windows at sunset, rest beside the service room during storms, and return to the radio before 2:17. He never missed a night. Walter tried taking him into town once. Atlas rode quietly for almost 6 miles, then became restless and stared back toward Sentinel Point until Walter turned the truck around. The moment the lighthouse appeared, the dog grew calm. Caleb reads faster. The storm fades behind the words. Walter describes the first signal arriving 3 months after Atlas came ashore. It was faint, no more than a burst of static and a partial voice. He recorded the time and contacted authorities, but technicians found no functioning transmitter. They called it interference. Walter did not argue. He only kept listening. Years later, his health began to fail. He arranged food deliveries through a local fisherman and installed a rain collection barrel inside the lower service room. He stayed longer than he should have because Atlas still waited, and Walter could not bear the thought of the dog holding watch alone. On the final complete page, the handwriting grows uneven. I once believed he was waiting for the man in the recording, Walter writes. Now I think he is waiting for the man the recording is trying to reach. Caleb stops. Atlas lifts his head. Beneath the sentence is a name written in capital letters. Caleb Mercer. For a moment, the only sound is rain sliding down the glass. Caleb touches the ink with one finger. Walter knew his name. Somehow the old Keeper heard enough of the message to understand who it was meant for, yet no report ever reached Caleb. The next page has been torn out, so have the 3 after it. Only a narrow strip remains near the binding, marked with a line of numbers. Caleb angles the flashlight. They are not dates. They are measurements. 42 inches north of the center gear, 18 inches below the lantern deck. Atlas rises before Caleb finishes reading. He moves toward the central lens assembly, then circles to the far side where the metal housing meets the wall. His nose traces a seam hidden beneath years of dust. Caleb follows. The measurements lead to a narrow brass plate no larger than a book cover. It appears decorative, part of the original Lighthouse machinery, but the screws are newer. Caleb brushes the surface clean. Scratched into the brass are 4 words. For the one who listens. He removes the screws carefully. Behind the plate is a shallow compartment containing a folded chart and a small key wrapped in oilcloth. The chart is a hand-drawn map of the tower. A red line begins at the lantern room, descends through the wall, and ends inside a sealed chamber beneath the beacon platform. Beside it, Walter has written, "The message was never meant for me. It was meant for a Marine named Caleb. I kept the light until he came." Caleb closes his eyes. Walter did not abandon Atlas. He kept someone else's promise until he no longer could. Atlas nudges the key with his nose. Caleb turns it over. A paper tag is tied to the ring with faded string. Lower access. The tower shudders under a hard gust, and somewhere below, a metal latch answers with a hollow knock. Caleb studies the map again. The chamber is not reached from the stairs. It lies behind the curved wall on the opposite side of the lens, sealed inside the oldest part of the lighthouse. Atlas begins walking toward it. His steps are slow, but his purpose has returned. At the wall, he stops beneath a narrow iron panel almost hidden by a hanging canvas cover. Caleb pulls the canvas aside and finds a keyhole. He inserts the key. It turns with resistance, then releases a lock that has not moved in years. A thin line opens in the wall, breathing out cold air scented with dust, machine oil, and salt. Atlas leans forward. From beyond the hidden door comes a soft electronic pulse. One tone, a pause, then another. Caleb looks back toward the radio in the lantern room. Its red light has gone dark. The signal is coming from inside the wall. Caleb eases the hidden door inward, and a narrow passage appears behind the curved wall. The space is barely 3 feet wide, built between the original stone tower and the later machinery surrounding the beacon. Cold air brushes his face. It smells of old batteries, wet iron, and canvas that has held the sea for too many years. Atlas enters first. His shoulders nearly touch both sides of the passage, and every step asks more of his weakened body than it should. Caleb keeps one hand near the dog's back without touching him. Atlas does not need to be guided. He remembers the way. The electronic pulse sounds again from below. One clear tone. 5 seconds of silence. Then another. The passage slopes downward beneath the lantern deck until it reaches a second iron door. A small brass plate beside the handle bears the words "Emergency Signal Room." Caleb tries the key. The lock turns, but the door resists as though the lighthouse has been holding its breath against it. He pushes harder. Dust falls from the frame. The seal breaks with a soft sigh. Inside is a chamber no larger than a walk-in closet. Shelves line one wall. A workbench fills the other. At the center sits a military signal recorder connected to a bank of maritime batteries, all housed beneath a canvas cover. A tiny green light blinks on the recorder. Atlas stops in the doorway. His ears rise. Caleb shines the flashlight across the room and feels the years collapse around him. An orange life vest hangs from a hook. The fabric is faded almost white along the shoulders, but the black lettering remains visible. Daniel Mercer. Beneath it rests a folded K9 flotation harness marked with Atlas's identification number. A silver whistle lies beside the harness, attached to a frayed cord. Caleb picks it up. Daniel carried that whistle everywhere during training. 2 short notes meant return. 1 long note meant stay. Caleb once joked that Daniel trusted the whistle more than his own voice. Daniel had answered that Atlas listened to both. Atlas approaches the workbench and touches his nose to the whistle. He does not whine. He simply stands there, eyes fixed on the small piece of metal, while rain moves against the tower like distant applause. Caleb finds a waterproof envelope tucked beneath the recorder. Inside is a maintenance sheet written by Walter Hayes. The first entry explains that the recorder arrived inside a damaged emergency case discovered below the lighthouse 3 days after Atlas came ashore. The casing was cracked, but the storage unit remained intact. Walter dried the equipment, replaced several wires, and connected it to the lighthouse batteries. He could recover only fragments. Each attempt drained power the old system could no longer replace. The final line has been underlined twice. One complete recording may remain. Playback must not be attempted until Caleb Mercer is present. Caleb lowers the paper. Walter knew the truth was inside this machine, yet he waited. Not from fear, from faithfulness. The message had a destination, and the old keeper refused to spend it on anyone else. Atlas moves to the far corner, where a dark stain of seawater marks the stone floor. Beside it lies a thin emergency blanket and an empty medical pouch. Caleb kneels. The pouch bears Daniel's initials. There are dates written on the wall in pencil, beginning the morning after the training accident and continuing for 4 days. Next to each date, Walter recorded the same observation. K9 returned to the shoreline. K9 searched at low tide. K9 refused to leave before sunset. Daniel had reached the lighthouse. He had not disappeared far out at sea, as the official report claimed. Atlas had brought him here, or at least led Walter to the place where he had been. Caleb studies the life vest again. One buckle is secured. The other has been neatly cut away, likely to free someone too weak to remove it. There is no sign of panic in the room. Everything has been arranged with care. A blanket, a water tin, the recorder placed within reach. Daniel had lived long enough to prepare a message, long enough to understand that Atlas might survive him. Caleb places his hand on the machine. The metal is cold, but a faint vibration moves through it. "This is what you guarded," he says. Atlas looks toward the recorder, then toward Caleb. The dog steps closer and rests his chin against Caleb's shoulder. It is the first time he has chosen comfort over duty. Caleb closes his eyes for one brief moment, allowing the warmth of the shepherd's breath to steady him. Then he removes the canvas cover. The battery gauge trembles just above empty. A handwritten label sits beneath the playback switch. Final transmission. Caleb checks the cables, cleans corrosion from 2 contacts, and reconnects a loose ground wire. The green light becomes brighter. The recorder emits a soft chime. Atlas immediately stands. His exhaustion seems to fall away beneath recognition. He faces the speaker and waits. Caleb reaches toward the switch, but the battery gauge drops another fraction. Only one playback remains. Once he presses it, there will be no second chance. Caleb keeps his hand above the playback switch while the battery gauge trembles near empty. Atlas stands beside him, staring at the speaker with the stillness of a dog who has waited through 7 winters for one command. The chamber feels smaller now. The walls hold the smell of salt, dust, and old canvas. Somewhere beyond the hidden door, the storm presses against the lighthouse in long, heavy breaths. Caleb checks every connection again. The ground wire is secure. The battery contacts are clean. The recorder light remains green, but only barely. He knows what Daniel would say. Stop searching for certainty. Use what you have. Caleb draws a slow breath and presses the switch. The machine clicks. A reel turns inside the casing. Atlas lifts his head. For 1 second, the speaker releases a low hum. Then nothing. Caleb waits. The reel continues to move, but no voice comes through. He adjusts the volume. Silence. He checks the output cable. Silence. The green light begins to fade. "No," Caleb whispers. He presses the connector deeper into its socket. The speaker gives a dry burst of static, then falls quiet again. Atlas remains facing it, ears forward, body rigid. Caleb works faster, though every part of his training tells him not to rush. He traces the cable toward the back of the recorder and finds a hairline crack in the insulation. He presses the damaged section between his fingers. The hum returns, weak and uneven. A distant sound rises beneath it. Water. Wind. Perhaps a breath. Then the battery gauge drops to its final mark. Caleb holds the wire steady. "Come on, Daniel." The reel turns. The speaker whispers. But no words come. The light goes out. The machine stops. The chamber becomes completely still. Caleb does not move. His fingers remain around the broken wire long after the last vibration disappears. He has crossed miles of storm, opened a room sealed for years, and placed his hope inside a machine that has answered with silence. Atlas lowers his head. The old shepherd sways once, then sinks slowly to the floor beside Daniel's whistle. Caleb turns at once and kneels beside him. Easy, Atlas. The dog's eyes remain open, but the strength has left his legs. Caleb slides one arm beneath his chest and brings him close. Atlas rests against him without resistance. His breathing is shallow. His heartbeat is slower than before. Caleb reaches for the water bottle, but Atlas turns his face away. He keeps looking toward the dead recorder. You did enough, Caleb says. You waited. You brought me here. You do not have to hold the watch anymore. Atlas closes his eyes. Caleb feels the words enter the room and disappear like prayers spoken into deep water. For 7 years, he has told himself that Daniel's final moments belonged to the sea, that no one heard them and nothing remained. Now even the last recording appears lost. The lighthouse shutters. Above them, something metallic releases with a distant clang. The emergency lights along the passage flicker once and die. Darkness settles over the chamber. Caleb turns on his flashlight and places it on the floor, letting the beam spread across Atlas's silvered muzzle and the whistle beside his paw. I am sorry I took so long, Caleb says. His voice is almost lost beneath the storm. I should have kept looking. Atlas opens his eyes and studies him. There is no accusation in them. Only the same patient attention Daniel once trusted more than any instrument. The shepherd moves one paw toward the whistle. His claws touch the cord. Then he nudges it toward Caleb. Caleb picks it up. The metal is cold in his palm. He remembers Daniel standing on a training field years ago, laughing as Atlas ran past him and returned at the sound of 2 short notes. Return. Come home. Caleb raises the whistle but cannot bring himself to use it. He is not coming through that door, boy. Atlas shifts again. Instead of looking at the door, he looks at the recorder. Then at the whistle. Caleb understands slowly. The command was never for Daniel. It was for Atlas. Caleb brings the whistle to his lips and gives 2 soft notes. The sound is thin inside the stone chamber. Atlas's ears lift. His eyes sharpen. With visible effort, he places both front paws beneath him. He rises halfway, falters, then tries again. Caleb supports his chest. That is it. Come home. Atlas takes 1 step toward him. At that exact moment, the recorder clicks. Caleb turns. The green light remains dark, yet the reel begins to move on its own, slow and steady. Static fills the chamber. Atlas freezes. From the speaker comes a man's breath, followed by a voice Caleb has not heard in 7 years. Caleb, Daniel says, using the childhood name no one else ever knew. If you are hearing this, then Atlas found you. The voice reaches Caleb through a veil of static, older only because memory has kept it young. Atlas stands beside the recorder, trembling, his amber eyes fixed on the speaker. Daniel draws a shallow breath before continuing. I do not know how much time this machine has, so listen carefully. The exercise went wrong when the fog closed around us. Our boat lost power less than 2 miles from Sentinel Point. Atlas stayed with me. He found the current before I did. He kept pulling toward the lighthouse, even when I could no longer tell which way the shore was. The recording fades beneath a rush of water, then returns. Caleb grips the edge of the workbench. He can picture his brother in the darkness, one hand, holding the harness, trusting the dog when instruments and human judgment had failed. Daniel speaks again. Atlas got me to the rocks. Walter found us after sunrise. He gave us shelter and tried every frequency he had, but the storm damaged the transmitter. I told him rescue would come. Maybe I needed to believe that. Atlas takes 1 slow step toward the speaker. His nose nearly touches the metal grill. The official search will be looking too far east, Daniel says. By the time anyone understands that, I may not be here to explain it. That is not what matters. Atlas is alive. He did everything I asked. More than I had any right to ask. Caleb lowers his head. The recorder carries a faint sound from the past, the gentle movement of a dog nearby. Then Daniel gives a small laugh, weary but unmistakably his. He keeps watching the door. He thinks I am going somewhere. Atlas releases a soft whine. The sound crosses 7 years and seems to enter the recording itself. Caleb places his hand against the dog's shoulder. Daniel pauses for several seconds. When he speaks again, his voice is quieter. Caleb, I know what you will do. You will blame yourself for not being here. Do not. You taught me that a Marine finishes the duty in front of him. You were doing yours. I was doing mine. Atlas was doing his. Caleb closes his eyes. The words find the place inside him where guilt has lived without challenge. There is one survivor at the light, Daniel continues. I used those words because I knew people would search for a man first. But I was talking about him. Atlas deserves to go home. He deserves a life that is not built around my last day. The shepherd turns from the speaker and looks at Caleb. For the first time, the question in his eyes begins to soften. Daniel's breathing becomes less steady, but his tone remains calm. Walter promised to keep trying the radio. I asked him to wait for you. Maybe that was selfish. Maybe I just needed to know my brother would hear my voice once more. Static swells. Caleb leans closer, afraid the remaining words will disappear. There is something else you need to understand. Atlas did not fail to bring me home. He brought me as far as anyone could. Tell him that for me. Caleb kneels until his face is level with the dog's. You hear that, Atlas? He whispers. You brought him home. Atlas blinks slowly. His body leans into Caleb's hand. The recorder clicks, and Daniel's voice returns with sudden clarity. Atlas, listen. The dog straightens at once. Years fall from his posture. His ears rise. His eyes become those of the young K9 in the photograph, waiting for his handler's command. Daniel gives 2 soft whistles through the recording. Return. Come home. Find Caleb, he says. Stay with him. That is your final order. Atlas remains motionless for one long breath. Then he turns away from the speaker. He walks toward Caleb, each step slow but certain, and places his head against the Marine's chest. Caleb wraps both arms around him. The dog no longer reaches back toward the machine. Daniel speaks one final time. Take care of each other, brother. Neither of you should spend another year waiting beside a door that will not open. The reel slows. Static fills the chamber like rain moving across an empty field. Then Daniel's voice becomes almost a whisper. The light did its job. Now leave it behind. The recorder stops. No miracle sound follows. No hidden message remains. Only silence, honest and complete. Caleb stays on the floor with Atlas held close as the storm begins to weaken beyond the stone walls. The shepherd's breathing settles against him. After 7 years of guarding a voice, Atlas has finally obeyed the command to walk away. By sunrise, the storm has moved east, leaving Sentinel Point beneath a sky washed pale and quiet. Caleb carries Atlas down the spiral stairs one careful step at a time, supporting most of the shepherd's weight against his chest. The tower no longer feels like a prison built from unanswered questions. It feels empty in the gentlest way, like a chapel after the final candle has gone out. At the bottom, Caleb pauses beside Walter Hayes's folded blanket and the photograph of Daniel on the training field. He places the silver whistle beneath the picture, then lifts the frame from the wall and slips it into his pack. Atlas watches without trying to turn back. Outside, the ocean is still restless, but the wind has softened. Gray waves roll beneath the cliffs, carrying broken pieces of cloud toward the horizon. Caleb wraps Atlas in his field jacket and settles him across the back seat of the utility vehicle. The dog rests his muzzle near the window, looking at the lighthouse only once before closing his eyes. At the veterinary clinic in Rockland, Dr. Hannah Brooks meets them before regular hours. She is in her early 40s, with calm brown eyes and the kind of voice that makes frightened animals believe the room is safe. She examines Atlas beneath warm lights while Caleb stands close enough for the dog to see him. The diagnosis is serious but hopeful. Dehydration, severe malnutrition, arthritis in both hips, a heart made tired by age and long winters. Nothing that kindness, patience, and time cannot begin to mend. Atlas remains at the clinic for 12 days. Caleb visits every morning before duty and every evening after sunset. At first, the shepherd eats only when Caleb sits beside the bowl. Then he begins finishing small meals on his own. On the 5th day, he walks the length of the recovery room. On the 8th, he carries Daniel's old photograph gently in his mouth from Caleb's chair to the blanket. On the 12th, Dr. Brooks opens the clinic door and says he is ready to go home. Caleb has not used that word in years. Home. It once meant a place where Daniel might call. Then it became a quiet house filled with unopened mail and rooms Caleb rarely entered. Atlas changes that within a week. He sleeps beside Caleb's bed, waits near the kitchen each morning, and follows him from room to room with the steady discipline of a partner checking every position. Caleb places Daniel's photograph on the mantel. The recorder stays locked in a cedar box beneath it. He never plays the message again. Some words are not meant to become background noise. They are meant to be heard once, carried carefully, and lived. By spring, Atlas has gained 22 pounds. His coat shines again beneath the sunlight, though the silver around his muzzle remains. He moves more slowly than the dog in the old photograph, but his eyes are brighter. Caleb takes him to the shore each Sunday. They walk only half a mile along the sand before resting beside the dunes. Atlas no longer searches the horizon. He watches seabirds, children flying kites, and Caleb throwing small pieces of driftwood into the shallow water. Months later, the state approves Caleb's proposal to restore Sentinel Point. The lighthouse will not return to regular navigation service, but its lower rooms will become a coastal rescue station and temporary shelter for working dogs displaced by retirement, storms, or loss. Volunteers repair the windows, replace the wiring, and clean years of salt from the stone. Walter Hayes, now living in an assisted care home outside Augusta, receives the first photograph of the restored tower. In it, Caleb stands beside Atlas beneath the new sign. Walter sends back a note written in the same careful block letters. Thank you for answering. On the first evening the beacon is relit. Families gather along the bluff while the sun lowers over the Atlantic. Dr. Brooks stands near the doorway. Coast Guard officers raise a small flag beside the tower. Caleb waits inside the lantern room with Atlas at his side. The old radio remains on the console, cleaned but disconnected. At precisely 2:17, Caleb looks toward it. No red light appears. No relay clicks. There is only the soft turning of the new lens and the sound of Atlas breathing beside him. The beacon comes alive. A warm circle of light moves across the glass, sweeps over the darkening water, and returns. Atlas does not face the sea. He looks up at Caleb. Caleb lowers one hand to the shepherd's head. We are home, he says. Atlas leans against his leg and slowly lies down. Far below, the gathered crowd grows quiet as the beam crosses the coast again. Inside the room, Daniel's photograph rests beside Walter's journal, not as proof of what was lost, but as a reminder of what loyalty preserved. Caleb watches the light travel into the distance. He once believed healing would arrive as an answer strong enough to erase grief. Now he understands that grace is often quieter. Sometimes it is an old dog choosing to leave his post. Sometimes it is a man finally opening his door. And sometimes the greatest miracle is not that a voice returns from the past, but that two faithful souls hear it, forgive themselves, and walk together into morning.